All right, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Daryl Royce with the AARP Alaska State Office. Glad you could be with us tonight for our monthly Age Smart Let's Talk presentation. I'd like to kick things off by welcoming the AARP Alaska Volunteer State President, Madeline Holdorf, to offer a few remarks. So Madeline, it is all yours.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight. As Daryl said, my name is Madeline Holdorf. I'm the Volunteer State President for AARP Alaska, and I would like to welcome you all to our February Age Smart Let's Talk presentation. Age Smart Let's Talk is a joint effort between AARP Alaska, the Anchorage Senior Activities Center, and the Older Persons Action Group, OPAG, which brings us the Senior Voice. We are proud to offer this series in an effort to share interesting and helpful information for Alaska's 50+ population. Prior to the pandemic, this series was an in-person event held at the Anchorage Senior Activities Center. And we are hopeful that we will be able to return to in-person presentations at some point this year. However, in-person events are still on hold and will remain that way until we receive further guidance on when we can safely get back together. I wear this yellow shirt because our state on the COVID map must be yellow before we can do in-person events. And last I checked, we are far from yellow. It appears we are blood red. So we'll look forward to heightening our COVID to a yellow at some point, and we'll be able to get together in person. I'm looking forward to hearing our guest speaker tonight because my life has changed with COVID. The friends I had before COVID, I sometimes rarely see. I've been hunkered in and I've been shy about going out and mingling among friends. And I think I'm not alone in that perspective. All of us, I think, have experienced a different type of relationship base since the pandemic. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Sheila has to talk with us about. Also looking forward to next month, our March Age Smart presentation. We will have a guest from the Anchorage Public Library, and she'll be joining us on March 8th. She or he will be joining us on March 8th. And Age Smart is always held on the second Tuesday of the month at 6:30. And you can find out the programming for Age Smart by visiting our AARP Alaska website, which is www.aarp.org/AK, and then click for upcoming Alaska events. Also, that website is perfect for knowing what AARP is up to statewide. And we're in the throes of advocacy at this time of the year. So if you want to know what's going on, that's the place to look. Thank you, Daryl, for this time. Thank you, Sheila, for joining us. And take it away, Daryl.
All right, thanks so much, Madeline. Thank you for your always wonderful and gracious opening remarks. And with that, Sheila, I would like to invite you to take it from here, introduce yourself, let us know who you are and what you'll be talking about this evening.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you, Madeline, for having me back. My name is Sheila Shinn. I live in Wasilla. I'm a local gerontologist. When I first started participating in the Age Smart series, I was working at the University of Alaska, the Anchorage campus, and I was the director of Geriatrics and Gerontology Initiatives. Like many people over the last few years, my life has changed. I left the university and I've been working on a variety of things in the community, working with local nonprofits, working to secure grant money to continue the great programming that our nonprofits do in our community for older adults. I also decided to take on a different career to see if I liked the legal world, and I became a court visitor, which is a fancy word for a case investigator for guardianships and conservatorships. Many of you know that oftentimes older adults end up in these legal arrangements. So I've been able to have the last few years to experience that firsthand as well. I love talking about this topic. I just want to say a caveat before we get started. This isn't a sex talk, and I'm not Dr. Ruth, and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert in that arena. What we're actually going to talk about tonight is the concept of intimacy. But intimacy tends to be synonymous with sex, at least in the media. I was just reading a recent news story. I'm not going to name any names, but I'm sure all of you have seen the news already, that a CEO had to resign because he had an intimate relationship with a subordinate. There's an automatic assumption that that is a sexual relationship, romantic relationship, but that's not what intimacy actually means. So I want to start off tonight with the literal definition of intimacy, and this comes straight out of the dictionary, and that is a close familiarity or friendship, closeness. It even means a private, cozy atmosphere. So when I saw these definitions, I decided not to do a PowerPoint presentation for this topic because I didn't want to be the talking head online behind a screen of words, because that's not very intimate. That's more like going to a conference or watching a recording. It doesn't foster a sense of intimacy. So I welcome all conversation and any questions throughout this entire presentation. This is for you, and I welcome your input.
And Sheila, with that, just remind everyone that people can either raise their hand if they'd like to ask a question, their little hand, or they can raise their virtual hand, or you're free to drop a question in chat. I'll be sure and pay attention to the chat feature. But since we are such a small group, I think we probably all feel pretty comfortable with just asking our questions sort of on an open mic, if you will.
Yes, I am absolutely fine with open mic questions. I want everyone to feel like they're participating in the conversation. When I first did this presentation, it happened in person. So that was the year before COVID. And we had it at the senior center. It was a Valentine's dinner, so it was themed, and we all dressed up. I wore red, like I'm wearing tonight, a red sweater in support of Valentine's Day next Monday. It was a lively conversation that started off very slow, which is why I follow the caveat now that it's not a sex talk. I think people were a little uncomfortable. But we talked a lot about what intimacy actually means, and does it change as you age? So intimacy in relation to aging. So of course, I stated the literal definitions. The euphemisms for intimacy include the act of sex, or even an intimate remark. It also can mean the closeness of observation or knowledge of a subject. So for example, I'm a gerontologist. I have an intimate knowledge of gerontological topics, as I've been studying this in my career for over 20 years. Definition of intimacy, something of personal or private nature. So some of the synonyms for intimacy are belonging, chumminess, closeness, familiar, inseparability, and nearness. So the antonym of intimacy is actually distance. So we're getting the idea that intimacy is kind of the umbrella, and then all of your acts or behaviors of intimacy would fall underneath that, and that would include the categories of sexual relationships with spouses, partners. So what are intimate relationships and what are their features? So most psychological and sociological theories include these, what we call the 5 relational components of intimacy. That includes commitment, deep feelings and expressions of caring and compassion, thinking about another and sharing values and goals, physical intimacy, and that includes close proximity as well as any kind of sexual relations, and interdependence. So when we look at these 5 relationship components of intimacy, I actually think more broadly than a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship when I use the term intimacy. I have friends that we share values and goals. We have a physical proximity. We see each other regularly. I like to consider my intimate relationships as being that inner circle in my life. Those were the people that I probably spent time with throughout the pandemic versus other friends that are a little in my broader circle of acquaintances. Like Madeline mentioned, the last 2 years have changed our ability to have close proximity with others. And I know especially in 2020, when things were really heightened and before the vaccines came out and before there was any kind of sense of safety within this pandemic, I know personally, I really wasn't leaving my house, and I was spending a lot of time with just really my family unit, those that either lived with me or I saw on a regular basis, my adult children, my grandchildren. And that was really it for the remainder of 2020. I don't think I saw but maybe a few close friends until we got to a place in 2021. And I want to say, for me, it was probably as we pushed towards springtime where I started to feel a little bit safer moving out and about in the community, being with friends that I didn't know that well, wasn't really intimate with, and being in the same room with people. So I just to throw out this question, how did you all handle at least the first part of this pandemic when things were really frightening? Were you still socializing?
Well, I can mention that I felt comfortable engaging with people on the golf course. Um, uh, Actually, the history on that is AARP had a golf league, but we couldn't meet, of course, because of the prohibitions from the office on how many could meet at one time. But I've continued on, and I've met a whole new circle of friends from the golf course. But we all felt safe out in the out of doors, and definitely social distancing on the golf course. But as the last 2 years have morphed, I find myself spending more time with those people, whether it's going over to simulator golf or things like that, or just keeping more in touch with that group of folks. So that has been a change for me.
Interesting. So you met a whole new set of friends during the pandemic.
Yeah, I had known some of them, but I became closer to them throughout the pandemic. And so in the second year, it was getting together at the golf course again, and now here we are in our third venture, third year. So yeah, it has been a new group of folks for me.
That's excellent, Madeline. Thank you. It's amazing how the pandemic has shaped a lot of us. We're coming out of this, and I say that loosely because we're still waiting for the post-pandemic phase, but a lot of us have made a lot of significant changes in our life. So thank you for sharing that. Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I started my brother, who's 2 years older than me and lives in the Portland area. We weren't in contact that often, but when things really started to get serious and the isolation and the distancing became severe, we started communicating to where we were emailing each other on a daily basis, sometimes 2 or even 3 times a day. So in that sense, it did bring us closer. At the same time, though, the small fitness facility I go to that has a very large social component to the group, and the activities we did just screeched to a halt, and I had to stop that. I can't remember now. That was in February of 2020, I think, when they finally basically closed the place down, and it was 6 or 8 months that I went out without that, and it was a triple whammy, because not only was I missing out on that fitness component, but also the mood elevating and the aspect that comes with that, and then the social aspect too, all went missing all at once.
So when we talk about intimate relationships, part of that is the socialization that comes with being with people that are close to us and that we are close to. Again, can be a lover, it could be a close-knit group of friends. And this pandemic really changed the way we interact with people. I mean, here we are in our second year of talking about intimacy on Zoom. There's a true irony to that, where we're trying to discuss intimacy online and we're not in person. And it does really change the feel of doing presentations this way, of having relationships that are only online. However, that is actually the way a lot of people have dealt with the pandemic. It's amazing what has been created through having this experience where we are literally shut in for months and months at a time. What it's done to change the way we communicate. It makes me wish I had invested maybe some money into stocks in Zoom or some of these apps that have come online in the last couple of years. If we'd all done that, had the foresight, we'd be millionaires today. So intimacy, you would think it's hard to create intimacy without being with a person. So let's step back to the time before high technology, when men were going to war, like World War II, World War I, and they were leaving their spouses and their families behind. So what did they do? They wrote letters, right? So you can foster a sense of intimacy when you're not actually there together in person, seeing them, socializing, having fun. You can still continue that feeling of intimacy without having to get too high tech. And that's the way we did it before internet, before telephones, before we had this kind of technology. So I was going to ask a question at this point. What are the definitions of intimacy? We've covered that. I do want to say that the reason why intimacy for human beings is so important is basically we're pack animals. We are meant to be in groups. That is human biology. It's innately inside of us. We are not meant to be isolated. Those people who live in isolation, there tends to be, and I won't say something wrong, but I would say probably something a little miswired, that they don't have that sense of needing to be in a community. There's been lots of research about what happens when you ignore babies. They don't thrive. We're seeing a lot of research in gerontology about the concepts of loneliness in older age. And there's studies that actually show that people can die of loneliness. There was one particular study that I was looking at that said, let me see if I can find it here in my list, that loneliness can create a physical reaction in the body that could be just as deadly as smoking a pack of cigarettes every day. So when people lose those connections, it doesn't just affect their mental health. It doesn't just affect their feelings. It affects them physically, and it can bring on physical problems that can lead to death.
Sheila, I have a
One
question.
study,
I'm
go
sorry,
ahead,
Sheila. I'm sorry to
go
interrupt
ahead.
you, but you got me thinking here about, we've been in this pandemic sort of phase for so long. We're starting to me to seem to adapt protocols about how we interact with one another. And is it fair to think that we will break out of those at some point and kind of return to seeing people and hugging them and shaking hands and being back in that kind of normalcy, if that becomes possible? Or we have to relearn that at some point, or will it just sort of come back naturally?
Honestly, Daryl, I would like to say that probably the older generation is going to go back to the way things were before. I think that for our younger generations, and I'm thinking my children and their children, the way technology is going, I think we're actually going to continue this trajectory that we're in, where, and it's not from a pandemic standpoint, it's from a convenience standpoint. I have to admit, I've not had to commute to work for 2 years. I can't believe how much money I've saved in fuel. So it's things like that, and the way technology itself is shifting, we have created in 10 years just this massive online presence for people of all ages, and it's working. So some of the things I saw throughout the pandemic that I thought were really fascinating for populations that tend to be isolated, and those are the ones who live in assisted living homes. Maybe they have physical disabilities that keep them from getting out and about on a regular basis. A lot of programs that are the either senior center programs or socialization programs or rehabilitation programs went to Zoom. And it was successful. And people still had a sense of belonging and a sense of intimacy, even in this kind of environment. I'm not sure that that's going to change much. What do you all think? Are you just, really excited to get back to normal as we knew it before? Or do you think you'll continue to do a lot of your socializing online?
Well,
Well, I think,
oh, go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Dave.
Madeline.
Okay. One thing I think is there are many people that are not tech savvy. And so what happens to them? Because I'm thinking about the social hours at the senior center, which are a couple of Wednesdays a month. And, you'd often see, 80 to 100 people, for a congregate meal and, getting together and that is still occurring. But there's also a gap with folks that are not familiar with technology, and I'm not sure what can take the place of the technology for them to thrive. I guess is my question. Yeah, my point that they're, yeah.
I absolutely agree, Madeline. There's always going to be groups of people who don't participate in this kind of high technology that we're seeing today. And those are the people who will come to the social congregate sites. Those are the people who will come to the senior centers and the community centers and the churches. Those are the people that throughout this pandemic, our nonprofits have worked very hard to make sure that they're reaching so they don't get lost in isolation. David, you were going to say something else. Did you want to jump in?
Oh, I was just going to say that to the specific question about, physical behaviors and things like that, I've seen commentators on TV and things joking about how they never liked shaking hands in the first place and thought it was, germ ridden. And as far as they're concerned, they're never going to do it again. So yeah, there could be some ongoing adaptations. At least in the West, I think that face masks are going to be, become part of the norm. And I also think that in regards to social things, there will be an ongoing evolution where they're kind of hybrid, where there'll be, that you can be on this site or participating virtually, either or.
I actually agree with that. In watching the way social media is evolving, I think that we're headed down the road of having more interaction using technology. I'm thinking in particularly Facebook, which is now Meta, is looking at, oh gosh, I've just lost the word, but hologram type technology. And I'm actually thinking that this is coming from the pandemic, but what a convenience for me to be able to go to a conference as a hologram while I sit in my house. Well, think about it. I mean, it changes the way we approach socialization. It saves a lot of money and costs. It's things like that. But okay, so that's great from one angle. That's great from an educational standpoint or a work standpoint, or maybe even being able to attend a wedding of a loved one that you can't physically travel to, but you can still be there with your hologram or FaceTime as it is today. What does that do to intimacy? It does change intimacy. And when you look at, again, the way humans are geared, we're pack animals. We don't do well with socialization. Part of that loneliness and isolation, part of that comes from the lack of human touch. Human touch is very important. And it wasn't until this pandemic that I began to realize how much I actually touch people. And I can be a little bit of a germaphobe myself too sometimes. I've never considered myself to be a big hugger. And when people come at me like this, sometimes that's a little intimidating. But how does it make me feel today? I'm more likely to pass on the hug. And I may still shake hands, but I do go wash my hands immediately. But human touch is paramount to being a human being. So think of it this way. What do we do when we want to punish human beings? What's the number one form of punishment? It's used in our prison system. It's used in tribes. Isolation. Isolation. So in prison, you go into an isolation cell and you're left there alone for 23 hours a day, I believe. I think you have 1 hour of being able to get outside, but you are being punished through isolation. Tribes will shun their members for breaking tribal rules. I've heard of a few villages that have had troublemakers in their villages, and they excommunicate them from the village. They send them off and they're no longer welcome. You're no longer a part of our tribe. Religions do it as well. Social isolation is one of the best ways to control human beings because we're afraid of being alone. No one wants to die alone. No one wants to live alone. Again, unless you're talking about people who I do believe are wired a little bit differently in their brains to not need that. Most human beings need to have some kind of community, companionship, and intimacy.
Sheila, there almost seems to be now kind of a new protocol developing in terms of how we interact with each other. And I mean, to me, it's almost, you can almost think of it humorously. If you had people come over to your house, they would, thank you for coming. Here's a COVID test. And, it's like there's this barrier between you. And once they clear the COVID test, oh, okay, then, we're kind of back to normal again. But there's this thing between us now, and we just can't get rid of it. And that's really one of the things I've noticed.
It is very much present in our lives. You can't turn on the news today without hearing something about COVID. I have a background in public health as well as gerontology, so this pandemic really frightened me at first. I'm thinking in my mind, pandemics, the first thing I think of is Ebola. And if this were an Ebola pandemic, I would be in a Tyvek suit, even on Zoom. But we're finding that it's not as virulent as we thought it was. We had a similar mass worldwide pandemic in the early 1900s with the flu. This is kind of taking a similar trajectory. I think that there will go back to a point to where we are openly socializing and being together as groups again. I don't think that the feeling of being a lot more careful is ever going to go away, especially with those of us that are older, those of us that are at higher risk. So speaking of, I live out here in Wasilla, and here's something that I found very interesting in regards to attitudes toward the pandemic. We have been wide open in the Valley this whole time. So there is no public health department in the Valley that can mandate things. So the Valley followed the governor's mandates. What the governor said is what the Valley did. So it was very interesting to me to go to the grocery store here in Wasilla and nobody's wearing a mask, to going into Anchorage and it is a requirement to get into the store. So attitudes across even regions like just next door can very much change and vary between people. It was really interesting to watch from a social perspective that restaurants remained open. People out here are still going to the senior center. They're still having activities. The senior center did close for a small period of time in early 2020 when everything first became an issue. I know that Matsu Senior Centers had only a few closures, but that's when there was staff testing positive for COVID. They didn't physically shut down for a long period of time, and they kept a lot of their home-based services going, especially Meals on Wheels. I do know that there was a period of time where for our most isolated seniors, Meals on Wheels was their only point of contact throughout the day. And that was all that they saw. And they were very isolated in those homes. And those, again, are the ones that I know the nonprofits today are targeting to make sure that they don't get lost in the shuffle. So let me jump over to, we're talking intimacy, social connections. So we've talked about the pandemic and how it's changed the way we approach our social connections. And yet our social connections are what make us human, and they're what keeps us healthy, and they're what keeps us safe, and they give us that sense of intimacy and connectedness. So I know that my approach to this has changed through the pandemic. I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things that I've done and the way I've changed the way I approach my relationships. First of all, like David said, I really reconnected with a lot of family that maybe I hadn't really kept in close touch with. In the beginning, it was a frightening scenario. So I have reached out and reestablished connections with family that live outside of Alaska, and we connect through technology. So I use email, I use text message. I have several apps. I don't have FaceTime. That's one particular platform that I don't have a phone that carries that app, but I do use Facebook Messenger to do video phone calls. I have grandchildren, and there was a period of time where the only way I was seeing my grandkids was to use Facebook Messenger to video call. And I really missed being able to put my hands on my grandkids, to be able to put my hands on my adult children. That was very difficult. So we're still actually utilizing technology more today, even in my own family. I think we've just grown used to utilizing technology to foster relationships and then seeing each other when we can actually get together. One of the other things that I did was I joined meetup.com. That's one word, meetup.com. And kind of like Madeline, I was looking for ways to get outdoors more, to have more of the socialization aspect of it, but not inside. So my summer 2020 and 2021 was fabulous. I was very active. I was hiking and doing a lot of outdoor activities. And I did meet some new friends that way that I still get out and do outdoor activities with. And that's a neat community. Meetup.com's been around for 20 years. And it's a great way to meet people in your local area who share your hobbies and interests. And it can be anything from like my groups or hiking, walking, outdoor groups to people who enjoy to play chess or online book clubs. So I'm a reader, and that's one thing I did miss was the book clubs I participate in, and we moved those over to Zoom. We would have friends would get together on Zoom. We'd have wine hour where we would just all get together and chat just like we are doing today. And it did help foster that sense of intimacy and relationships with these groups. So did anybody do anything different as far as keeping in touch with your friends and loved ones? I know we talked about David and his brother and emailing.
We had some group game nights virtually, playing kind of an online platform, but sharing it at the same time. It was kind of set up to do it that way, but yeah, we did it with, we'd have people in multiple states all engaging all at the same time. And we had never done that before until this, it was kind of out of necessity, and it was a lot of fun.
Exactly. And amazingly, it does help foster a sense of connectedness, which furthers that feeling of intimacy in relationships. It wasn't all bad. Yeah, so that was a really neat thing that researchers are actually starting to focus on. The title of this presentation, I changed it to Love in the Time of COVID. And the reason why I did that is because I actually found a wonderful article that was titled that, so I stole it, but I want to give her credit. This is from Dr. Terry Apter, and this is an article from Psychology Today that was the antithesis to other things that I've been reading about how the divorce rate spiked in COVID and people got, locked down and then realized they hate each other and divorces everywhere and people breaking up. And here was this article that actually kind of debunked that myth, that went along the same lines of people adapted rather than just, holed up in their house and never left. They actually adapted, and they used technology as a way to adapt. So she goes to talk about young people and single people. A lot of people turned from meeting people in person to online dating. So online dating became popular at the advent of the internet, you guys. Believe it or not, online dating, it kind of morphed when the internet was created. It was one of those things that has been around since like 1999, I believe. Was probably one of the first dating websites that came on board. It just tells me that people are still hungry for connection. They're hungry for making new connections, and they're looking for innovative ways to meet people. So Dr. Apter talks about how this actually became even more popular, especially for younger adults, but surprisingly also for older adults. And we'll talk in a minute about some of the new websites that are geared specifically to older adults looking to meet romantic partners. One of the things I thought was really interesting in her article is she quotes, only 14% of people that were surveyed, and granted this comes out of the United Kingdom, were surveyed over the age of 55 reported any negative feelings toward being in lockdown with their significant others, be it a wife or a husband or a partner or just a romantic partner. Only 14% of those people surveyed over the age of 55. When on the other hand, if you look all over the internet, divorce rates are spiking, they're soaring. Gray divorce, I saw, is a term right now that seems to be really popular. She found something completely different. And it's a similar experience that I had. I actually enjoyed having some extra time with my husband. He works a lot, so I don't get to see him often. And we got to spend 45 days at a time together in our house, going nowhere. And it really was actually quite pleasant. We did a lot of projects. We actually had a good time together. It was a scary time in early 2020. We made the best of it. Okay. And I also want to add the caveat that I met this man online. So I am one of those online dating success stories. And we still joke about how we should call Match.com so we can be in a commercial. But we actually met online in 2013. And we ended up married in 2015. So I can say that these dating websites, I think they're here to stay, folks. And I don't see it being something that older adults should shy away from, unless, of course, we're talking about those that are well into their 80s and maybe not really interested in that kind of technology. So has anyone else online dated and wants to admit to it on our recorded Facebook live stream?
I have not.
Yeah.
I missed that whole phenomena. A few years ago, I was in a training with a bunch of younger people, and they were all talking. At that time, Tinder was really huge, of course, and they were all sharing stories about that. And I had to ask one to give me a show and tell of the app on their phone, because I told them even having that on my phone would raise questions, but I was, kind of curious as to what the app looked like and things like that. So I have been involved with meetups though, or Meetup. Yeah.
Yes, I love Meetup. I've been using meetup.com since probably 2010. And if I'm looking for something specific, like when I moved out to Wasilla from Eagle River in 2015, and all of my friends live in Anchorage and Eagle River, and I didn't know anybody. And, no offense to folks who live in Anchorage, but everybody thinks the valley is very far away. So nobody wants to drive out here. So I had to make new friends. And Meetup was one of the ways that I accomplished that. So you can target people who share your same interests, your same values, your same goals, your same hobbies. And I really do like that. So Tinder, Tinder did not make the top 10 list of dating sites for older adults. And when I say older adults, I mean people over 50, 55. Tinder is definitely a young people's approach to dating. And I'm trying to be as gracious as I can. It tends to be more of what young people would call a hookup app. And so expectations for intimacy using the Tinder app are much different than the expectations of using an app like Match.com or eHarmony or Silver Singles. Tinder is definitely one of those that popped up right before the pandemic, became really popular, that I know a lot of older adults who have tried it don't really care for, because they don't tend to be people looking for relationships. They're people looking for sex. And there's still a lot of people in the world who need to have intimacy to be able to have sex. So Tinder is one of those, I think, for the majority of the population, people that are looking for sex. Now, that said, there's plenty of dating websites out there that are geared toward people looking for relationships. So in the top 10, especially for older adults, Match.com and eHarmony are your two highest rated. And they are also two of the longest running of probably the apps over the last 15 years. So these websites have been around for a long time. They have a good vetting process. They have security measures. They have affordability built in. eHarmony has has quite a long vetting process. And their matchmaking process is it doesn't let you choose per se. It matches you. It doesn't let you look through everything. Whereas Match.com, you can look at everyone's profile. Doesn't matter what their gender is either. You have that open concept to that dating website. So that's where my husband and I met, and we eventually got married. And the way I looked at it, I was single in my 40s, recently divorced. The way I looked at it was I was expanding my pool of potentials. Okay, so here's the downside to anything on the internet. And I just want to get this plug in because one of the things I have seen over the last couple of years of working in the court system and working with guardianships and conservatorships is a lot of older adults who are defrauded online. And it's not just dating websites. Even places like meetup.com, you have to be very, very careful, because with the expansion of everything going online, especially through the pandemic, what that brings is the predators and the people who want to part you from your money. And the romance scams, or otherwise known as sweetheart scams, are one of the biggest scams that are perpetrated against older adults. And older adults oftentimes tend to be widows, and they tend to be vulnerable in ways that younger people maybe are not. Older adults may not be quite so savvy. They might not realize it would be in their best interest to run background checks on people. And it's not that hard today to run background checks on people. I vetted every single person I met on Match.com before I actually met them in person. When I did meet them in person, I let trusted people in my life know who they were, where they were. I almost asked for social security numbers. I was that paranoid. I met people in public places, well-lit areas. You have to have a real strong sense of safety and a sense of savviness to engage in and foster relationships on the internet, because you don't always know who you're talking to and what their real agenda is. AARP has one of the best initiatives on how to protect yourself from fraud. When I'm working with people and doing trainings like these, I always send them to AARP websites to look at the things you should know, the red flags you should look for. Number one, of course, is somebody asks you for money. They are not your friend. Not your friend. They are not interested in you romantically. That is the biggest red flag to look for in developing online relationships of any kind. If somebody you have not met yet wants you to give them money, they're not your friend. Yes, thank you. AARP Fraud Watch Network. Oh, there's some great podcasts on there as well, Daryl. I was just listening to one a few weeks ago in relation to a fraud case I'm working on. So older adults, especially those with cognitive deficits, be it dementia, stroke, just simple brain atrophy related to aging, these can be very vulnerable people. So if you're working with, or you have a friend who's all of the sudden developing online romances, just be forewarned that with the expansion of online relationship opportunities comes the expansion of predators and scams. And I've seen too many cases now of older adults losing everything. At this point, I think we need another initiative to teach people how to be internet savvy. So I want to make sure to end this discussion tonight with, if you are participating in or you're looking to participate in expanding your relationship opportunities of any kind on the internet, please also do so with some education for yourself about the big red flags of fraud, of catfishing, of romance scams, of different apps that really have a bad reputation. Make sure you know how to protect yourself while you're online. Predators are everywhere. Oh, Daryl says, what is catfishing? Catfishing it's kind of a slang term for somebody entering into a relationship with you pretending to be someone else. It is such an endemic thing in the internet that there was actually a TV show made about this. There's even been a lot of powerful people, celebrities, who have admitted to being catfished in the past. So there's people out there who have nefarious agendas. You don't always know who you're speaking to behind the technology. That's what technology removes from intimate relationships, is the ability to know the person, to see who they are, to watch their body language, to trust your own intuition when you meet somebody in person.
Sheila, you raise a really good point here. We are dealing with each other in a two-dimensional world right now, and you just hit on it here, how you don't get a lot of the body language, or you can't see a lot of those tells, or you might miss a lot of things that you would have picked up in person. And how much of that are we missing? How much communication are we missing that we would normally have, but how much are we missing in this two-dimensional world?
A lot, but because we're on video, you have more than nothing. It's like how people miscommunicate over text message or email. When you're reading the written word, you have to be a very good writer to be able to infuse your written word with true emotion. So with text messaging, we've come up with the emojis. Is everyone familiar with the emojis and the smiley faces and all the little pictures? That is technology's way of trying to introduce some of that emotion, or it gets lost in translation. Human connectedness is only about 7% verbal. The rest of the way we interact with each other is nonverbal. So that's why we've been able to be successful with platforms like Zoom, is at least you can pick up on the nuances of human communication, as long as, of course, you have a good monitor. And in my respect, I probably should have put on my glasses. So yes, you're losing that very much so, which is why I don't think we will become a society that solely relates to each other through technology. I think that would absolutely defeat human nature, and human beings would just not like it.
Well,
So we're coming up to the end here, Daryl. Anybody have any other questions, any comments?
Time to open up the microphones here and offer any questions you may have, and no problem. We can take as much time as we need. So we're a small group, so feel free to either chat your question in or just take yourself off mute.
Well, I wanted to thank Sheila. Thank you very much for your insights. One thing that occurred to me when you were talking about the beginning of the internet is I remember a phenomenon called chat rooms back then, and people were really into these chat rooms, and it was like a substitute for being personally social. So that was an interesting memory for me. Thank you.
Yes, I remember that too. I was in college back then. And so I was actually, one of the topics that I thought was interesting is how is technology going to change aging? And so I was one of those early chat room internet adopters from just looking at it from a college research perspective. Chat rooms are still very popular. We have now chat apps, and the apps are what you download onto your phone. And you can do virtually the same thing, only now our computer is a device about the size of our hands. There's also a lot of forums online. There's all kinds of educational opportunities. The internet has just created a complete global connection that we've not seen before. As human race, at least that we're aware of, I should say, we've never been this globally connected. And how does this change how we interact as humans? How does it affect intimacy? These are things that smart people are researching today. And I'm looking forward to seeing how the pandemic also has changed that.
Well, Sheila, it has been an absolute joy to have you back with us. I think I saw your last presentation. Was it virtual the last time you were with us?
It was only the first one.
Okay, I imagine we probably wrapped up that virtual conversation by saying, boy, I can't wait till we get to have this conversation in person again. So I'm going to say I can't wait till we get to have this conversation in person again, because I think it would really be great to have you back in front of a real group of people. It probably adds another dynamic to that whole conversation. But
it definitely did. Yes.
Yeah, really just excellent information. I'm just so glad you were able to take some time and share your time with us tonight. Really appreciate you being with us. We wanted to have this subject sort of close to Valentine's Day, which is, I think, a little less than a week away. But we thought it would be apropos to have it at least have this conversation during a time period that is close to Valentine's Day. So, but again, just really thank you so much. You always bring wonderful information to the conversation, and so great. And I wish we could keep going, because I imagine we could probably continue this conversation for some time. But I do want to be respectful of everyone's time. And of course, you did mention that we are connected in ways we've never been before. We're live streaming this on Facebook right now, and hopefully, sharing this great information there as well. So Sheila, thanks again so much. Always great to see you, to have you back with us, and I really appreciate your time. Everyone else, Madeline, David, Jane, thanks so much for being with us. And we are recording this. Recording will be available at ARP Alaska. That's www.aarp.org/AK. You can also visit that same website and find out what other virtual activities we have that will be happening in the near future. And it will be virtual activities for some time until we can gather once again in person. So with that, just want to wish everyone a wonderful evening and hope to see you at the next Age Smart. And Sheila, again, thank you so much for just an outstanding presentation.
Oh, thank you for having me, everyone. I appreciate everyone's time. Have a great evening.
You too.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Sheila.
Daryl.
Good night, everyone.